Welcome back. We've spent days working on experimental probability. And the reason behind working on experimental probability is now we can take these experiments and predict future events. Okay, and we actually have multiple ways to do this. So let's look at our first example. It says, Danae found that the experimental probability of her making a bullseye when throwing darts is 2 out of 10, or 20%. Out of 75 throws, about how many bullseyes could she predict she would make? So we have two separate ways we can solve these problems to be able to predict future events. The first way is through using a proportion. Again, we should remember that proportion is percent over 100 equals part over whole. And then we can set up a proportion to figure out how many bullseyes she would make if she threw 75 darts. So on our left side, we put our probability that we have, which we have 2 out of 10. Okay, so if she makes 2 out of every 10, we want to figure out how much she would make out of 75. So we're looking for a part out of the whole of 75. Okay, so if she makes 2 out of every 10, we can figure out how many she makes out of 75 by setting up a proportion. Okay, and then we remember we multiply across, multiply, and then divide by our extra number. So first thing we do is 75 times 2, which is 150, and then we divide by our extra number, so we divide by 10, and when we divide by 10 we cancel out our zeros, and that means she would make 15 bullseyes if she were to throw 75 darts. Okay, that's our first way of solving these. The second way we can solve them is using a percent equation. Okay, so they tell us in the problem that she hits 20%, because 2 out of 10 is 20%, they're equal. Okay, we can use that 20% to now figure out how many she would make out of 75 by using a percent equation. And we want 20% of 75. That of tells me I'm going to multiply. So we do 75, and we multiply by 0.2 because that is what 20% is as a decimal. Okay, when we do that, we get 2 times 5 is 10, 2 times 7 is 14, plus 1 is 15, and then we have one decimal place. We move it over one decimal place, and we put our decimal point, and we get 15, which matches up with our first answer, which is what we want because we should get the same answer for both. Okay, so there are two ways to solve these. The first one is through proportions. The second one is through using percent. Take a second, complete your turn, and then come back to me. Your turn says a car rental company sells accident insurance to 24% of its customers. Out of 550 customers, about how many customers are predicted to purchase insurance? Since they already gave me a percent, I want to use a percent equation to solve this one. So there are 550 customers and 24% of them receive rental insurance. That means if I wanted to solve this, I do 550 times 0.24 because that's my decimal for 24%. Your math will tell me what 24% of 550 is. I do my multiplication. I have 2 decimal points, so I move it over 2 points, and I put my decimal point, and that means if I had 550 customers, 132% of them would buy, 132 of the customers would buy accident insurance. All right, let's take a look at another example. This example says a doctor's office records data and concludes that on average, 11% of patients call to reschedule their appointments each week. The office manager predicts that 23 appointments will be rescheduled out of 240 during next week. Explain whether the prediction is reasonable. So in this case, they're telling us that 11% of the patients call to reschedule their appointments. The doctor is saying 23 people will do that this week. So we need to figure out what actually 11% is out of 240, and then figure out whether that prediction is reasonable, whether it's close or whether it's not. So again, there are two methods we can go about. We can use proportions or we can use percents. I'm going to go through each of them. You pick whichever one is easiest for you. So for proportions, we know that 11% called to reschedule their appointments. And 11% as a fraction is 11 out of 100. Okay, we want to figure out how many will reschedule out of 240. Okay, so we're looking for our missing number here. I'll put an X. We cross multiply. We do 24 or 240 times 11. And then we divide by our extra number. We divide by 100. So we'll start by doing 240 times 11. And you get 2,640. Divide by 100 means I move my decimal point over 2 places, and I get 26.4 people. Obviously, we can't have 0.4 of a person, so it's about 26 people. Okay, if we were going to solve this using percents, we would do 240 times 0.11. That's our first step. When we multiply, we get, again, 26.40 or 26.4 people. We have the same answer, but that's a good sign. Okay, but that's not what they're asking. What they're asking is explain whether the prediction is reasonable. Okay, the doctor predicted that 23 people would call or reschedule. We have 26.4 people on average. I would say that's a reasonable estimate. It's pretty close. Again, if you can explain it, it doesn't matter whether you say it's reasonable or not reasonable. You could say that 3 people is a lot of people to be off. Or you could say that 3 is really close. As long as you're able to explain yourself, and as long as you have the numbers to back it up, you'll be fine. Let's take a look at our last example. Your turn. It says, in emails to monthly readers of a newsletter, 3% of the emails come back undelivered. The editor predicts that if he sends out 12,372 emails, he will receive 437 notices for undelivered emails. Do you agree with this prediction? Explain. So, we need to figure out how many 3% is out of the 12,000 emails he sends, and then determine whether or not we think his prediction is reasonable. Okay, because they give it in a percent again, I think that using a percent equation is the fastest way to do it. If they give you a proportion, then I would use a proportion, but in this case they're giving us a percent, so I'm going to use 3%. So I want to do 12,372 times 0.03. Remember, to turn a percent into a decimal, you move it over 2 places. Okay, so if it's anything less than 10, they're just going to make sure you include that 0 right there. Okay, and then we multiply. 6, 3 times 7 is 21, 3 times 3 is 9, plus 2 is 11, 3 times 2 is 6, plus 1 is 7, 3 times 1 is 3. We move it over 2 decimal places. We put our decimal point in, and we get about 371. This sign just means about 371 undelivered. Again, now it's up to you whether you think that that is a reasonable estimate. To me, being 66 notices off isn't reasonable. That's pretty far off. But to some people, out of 12,000, you may say that's really pretty close. Okay, as long as you're able to explain yourself and you have the numbers correct, you'll be fine.